In the quiet hills of Montana, Daniel believed silence would be his revenge. No calls, no messages, just absence. But as the days stretched on, it wasn't her heart that cracked. It was his illusion, because no contact doesn't always break them. Sometimes it breaks you open. That's when Daniel stopped waiting for regret to echo back. He didn't go silent to be missed. He went silent to finally hear himself. And what he heard wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something unshakable. This isn't about getting her back. It's about becoming the man she never saw coming. Stay with me. 1. Burn the illusion. Let go of the fantasy. There was a time Daniel believed she saw him, really saw him. Not just the surface, the job title, the polite smile, the steady hands, but the places in him that felt raw and unspoken. In his eyes, she was gentle, loyal, the kind of woman who stayed when things got quiet, who'd curl up beside him in the silence and never ask him to be louder than his wounds. But the woman who left on that rainy Thursday in Savannah wasn't that woman. And maybe, just maybe, she never was. The grief that followed wasn't for her. It wasn't even for the relationship. It was for the story he told himself late at night. The one where she'd always come back. The one where she was different, where love was enough. That story lived in his chest like a lullaby he refused to stop humming. But over time, he saw it for what it was, a dream stitched together from his own longing. In the attic of his mother's house, dust-covered boxes held letters she never wrote, promises she never kept. He burned them slowly, one by one, not out of spite, but ceremony. Each flame whispered the truth. She didn't break his heart. She exposed where he had no boundaries, where he clung to hope more than truth, where he believed love was proven by sacrifice, even when it drained him dry. And as the smoke curled into the ceiling, Daniel didn't cry. He just sat still, hands warm from the fire, finally understanding. He hadn't lost a soulmate. He had lost a fantasy, a version of her that never truly existed beyond the space behind his closed eyes. And in that letting go, he didn't just reclaim his heart, he reclaimed reality. And there's nothing more powerful than loving yourself enough to stop loving what was never real. 2. Become unreachable. Withdraw your energy. There's a difference between disappearing and detaching. One is a performance. The other is a decision. Daniel used to think silence was enough, that if he blocked her, muted her name, deleted her number, he'd find peace. But the truth is, even in silence, she lingered, in the empty spaces of his day, in the songs that shuffled in by accident, in the ache that came when his phone lit up and it wasn't her. And that was the real prison, not her presence, but her power. It wasn't until a chilly afternoon in a Denver coffee shop that he felt the shift, the hum of espresso machines, the blur of strangers. And there he sat, staring at a blank screen, about to post another quote that wasn't meant for the world, but for her. To show her he was okay. To make her wonder. To say without saying, "Look at me now." But something stopped him. A quiet voice inside, tired of the games, tired of the hope dressed as pride. He put the phone down and reached for his journal, not to write about her, but to write to himself. To remember who he was before he handed his worth to someone else's recognition. From that day on, he didn't post for her, didn't scroll for clues, didn't leave emotional breadcrumbs scattered across the internet, hoping she'd follow. Because if she could still make his heart race with a story post, she still owned part of him. And Daniel? He was done giving away real estate in his soul. He didn't disappear. He became unreachable. Not because he hid, but because he no longer reacted. Because her shadow no longer dictated the shape of his day. In that quiet detachment, he found a power stronger than revenge. A man who doesn't need to be seen to know he's real. 3. Master the void. become still enough to evolve. In the wide open belly of Texas, there's a long stretch of highway that cuts through the desert like a scar, miles of nothing, framed by skies so wide it feels like the stars are leaning in just to listen. That's where Daniel found himself one night, windows down, the dry wind whispering through his car like a hymn. No music, no calls, no distractions. Just the rhythm of the road beneath him and the steady, unspoken truth he'd been avoiding. This wasn't loneliness, this was sacred stillness. Because silence, real silence, isn't the absence of sound. It's the absence of escape. And when there's nowhere to hide, you meet the one person who's been waiting all along. Yourself. Most men fill the void. With noise, with women, with plans, with everything that keeps them from feeling the ache of what was lost. But Daniel didn't want to escape anymore. He wanted to understand. So he didn't chase closure, didn't scream into the void, hoping it would echo back an apology. He just drove deeper into the silence, deeper into himself. While she chased attention, comments, reactions, borrowed warmth, Daniel chased nothing. And in that nothingness, he found everything: clarity, peace, resilience. Because silence isn't punishment, it's purification. That night, he pulled off the road, parked under a canopy of stars, and let the weight settle in his chest without fighting it. And instead of crumbling, he breathed, slowly, steadily. This wasn't survival. This was transformation. Because the man who can sit in the dark without needing to fill it is the man who no longer begs for light. He becomes it. And Daniel, he didn't just master the void, he made it home. A place not of endings but of rebirth, where every quiet second whispered, "You're becoming someone she'll never recognize." And that's the point. 4. The mirror effect. Reflect her choices. When she walked away, Daniel didn't chase her into the storm. He didn't send paragraphs soaked in heartbreak, didn't try to rewrite the ending with one more confession. He chose silence. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that reveals. Because he understood something most never do. You don't teach people with explanations. You teach them with absence. In the quiet days that followed, he didn't broadcast his pain. He simply lived with it, sat beside it like an old friend, and let it sculpt him. Every unanswered message, a reflection of her choices. Every silent sunrise he greeted alone, a consequence of her absence. He didn't need to argue. He became the mirror and let her face herself. Weeks later, in a small grocery store on the edge of Knoxville, they crossed paths, the same aisle they once laughed in, picking out coffee they never finished. She stood there, hair curled, lipstick careful, wearing the same perfume he used to trace in the dark. He met her eyes for a moment. No anger, no smile, no flicker of the boy who once begged for her love. Just stillness. And in that breathless beat of silence, something shifted. She saw herself, not in the romanticized version she'd hoped he still clung to, but in the cold clarity of who she'd become through his absence. The man in front of her wasn't pleading. He was whole. He was changed. She expected bitterness. She expected proof that she still lived in his bones. Instead, she found a mirror, clear, unwavering, impossible to look away from. That's what haunts them. Not your rage, not your desperation, but your refusal to validate their story. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He raised his standard. And in that quiet elevation, she saw the truth. She didn't just leave. She lost a man who became better, not for her, but because of her. 5. Withdraw all validation. Starve her ego. Los Angeles had a way of remembering. The coffee shop on Melrose still made the vanilla lattes she used to love. The mural on Sunset Boulevard still bore the colors they once took photos beneath. But Daniel no longer looked up when he passed those places. He no longer checked to see if she might be near, or watching, or wondering, because something inside him had shifted. He no longer lived to be seen by her. There was a time, early on, when every post was a whisper in her direction, a curated image, a cryptic caption, all crafted for one purpose, to make her feel something: regret, curiosity, a pang of missing what she threw away. And maybe, for a while, it worked. She still viewed his stories, liked a post here and there, sent a "hope you're good" text when the silence stretched too long. But it was never love. It was maintenance, ego upkeep, until Daniel learned the truth. Validation is a currency, and he had been giving it away for free. So he stopped posting for her, stopped performing pain dressed up as pride. He didn't post thirst traps. He didn't accidentally leave a song lyric about heartbreak lingering in his feed. He simply stopped needing her to know how far he'd come. And that's when it started to sting. Not for him, but for her. Because he wasn't angry. He was finished. The ego doesn't break from insults. It breaks from irrelevance. And when she realized his world no longer turned in her direction, when she saw his glow without a spotlight, without applause, she felt it. He wasn't louder. He was just gone, not out of spite, but out of growth. Daniel didn't leave to make her miss him. He withdrew because she no longer deserved the access she once took for granted. And in that absence, her ego finally starved. 6. Transmute the pain into power. Pain has a way of sitting with you in the quiet, like an uninvited guest who won't take the hint. It doesn't shout. It lingers, heavy, constant, familiar. And Daniel, for a time, let it stay. Let it press into his chest while he lay awake in the early hours of Kentucky mornings, wondering how something once so beautiful could end without explanation. But then, one day before sunrise, he stood up. Not because the pain disappeared, but because he decided it wouldn't own him anymore. He laced his running shoes before the sun touched the sky, hit the gym with a fire in his veins and a silence in his soul that asked for no audience. He lifted the weight not just off the bar, but off his heart. With every rep, he wasn't thinking of her. He was thinking of the man she never truly met, the one buried beneath all that love he gave too freely. He didn't build muscle to be noticed. He built discipline to be whole. And when his hands shook from the work, it wasn't weakness. It was release. Outside the gym, he launched a business with quiet conviction. No flashy announcements. No captions meant to spark curiosity, just grit, consistency, purpose. He didn't post about the glow-up, because this wasn't for her. It was for the boy inside him who once begged to be chosen, who thought being enough meant being everything to someone else. Daniel no longer waited for her to look back, because he no longer lived in the version of himself she remembered. That's the real glow-up, not revenge, not applause, but rising so far, so fully, that she wouldn't recognize the starting line even if she tried. And when people asked if he forgave her, he just smiled. Because when you transmute pain into power, you no longer carry the past. You carry fire. 7. Become the man she can't replace. Not all men crumble when love leaves. Some do, curl in on themselves like paper in flame, folding under the weight of what was lost. But others, they forge. They take the burn and turn it into steel. Daniel chose to forge. In Washington, D.C., surrounded by glass towers and voices chasing headlines, he sat behind a microphone, not to talk about her, not even to hint at what broke him. He spoke about vision, legacy, quiet strength, the kind of power that doesn't beg to be seen because it's already known. His voice was low, even, steady, not performative, not bitter, just sure. And somewhere, someone was listening. Maybe her, maybe not. It didn't matter. Because Daniel had become something rare, the kind of man who no longer needed to be remembered, because he had become unforgettable. You see, women don't miss the loudest man. They don't miss the one who posts cryptic messages or throws words like stones, hoping they'll bruise. They miss the one who vanished into his becoming, the one who stopped seeking their memory and instead chased his own meaning. Daniel didn't glow up to make her jealous. He didn't chase success so she'd double-take. He simply became the man she thought she could replace. And then realized, too late, she couldn't. And the irony? She left thinking he was just another man she could forget. But men like Daniel, men who evolve in silence, men who rise without needing to prove, they stay. Not in her inbox, but in the stillness of her regret. Because every man after him will be measured in fractions. None will carry peace like a weapon. None will walk into a room with presence carved from pain. And none will love without needing to be needed. Daniel didn't just move on. He moved beyond. And that's what made him irreplaceable. 8. Build a new identity in shadow. True transformation doesn't ask for witnesses. It doesn't come with applause or Instagram reels. It happens quietly, like winter turning to spring beneath frozen soil. That's where Daniel changed. In the dim hours before sunrise, when the world was still asleep and no one expected anything from him. In the solitude of his small Nashville apartment, where silence wrapped around him not like loneliness, but like shelter. No lights, no validation, just the echo of his own breath and the question that haunted him. Who are you when no one's watching? So he got to work, not on revenge, not on impressing her, but on becoming someone he could trust. He read books that made him uncomfortable, cooked for himself, meditated when his chest ached with things he couldn't name. He rebuilt his mornings, reshaped his habits, and learned to sit in stillness without reaching for noise. And when her name came up at dinners with old friends, those familiar nudges laced with nostalgia, he didn't flinch. He didn't defend. He just smiled. Because he had stopped living in the version of himself who needed closure, who needed to be seen to believe he had value. Daniel no longer curated his healing for an audience. He didn't post cryptic updates or trail breadcrumbs hoping she'd notice the change. Because real identity isn't proven by who watches. It's defined by who you become when no one does. And in her world, he disappeared. Not because he ran, but because she no longer had access to the man she once knew. The version she left, that man was gone. What rose in his place was not louder, not colder, just untouchable. A man born from shadow, shaped by silence, and entirely unreachable, not out of pride, but out of peace. 9. Let her watch from afar. She still saw him, now and then, a photo tagged at a charity gala in Charleston, a story reshared from a local startup's success, a mutual friend mentioning him in passing, with that quiet tone people use when they know the past still lingers. Daniel didn't hide, but he didn't perform either. He wasn't curating moments to provoke curiosity. He wasn't posting half-healed quotes or revenge-driven reels. He was just living, fully, calmly, without her in the frame. She, on the other hand, was still scrolling through memories. Not to return, but to measure, to see if he missed her, to see if he needed her to see him. But Daniel had stopped playing that part. The one where he lingered just close enough to be noticed, just quiet enough to be mysterious. He didn't need her to feel his absence. Because his presence had grown into something she no longer recognized, let her watch. From a distance she created. From the edges of a life she chose not to walk beside. The truth is, Daniel didn't block her. He didn't cut her off. He simply grew in a direction she couldn't follow. And that's what stings the most. Not being erased, but being outgrown. Now when she sees him, laughing without hesitation, speaking with purpose, loved by a circle that never questioned his worth, she doesn't see the man she left. She sees a man she never truly knew. And that's the quiet revenge. He didn't have to shut the door. He just built a new one, farther down the road, out of reach, in a house where her name was never etched into the foundation. Daniel didn't exile her. He simply evolved. And she became the past tense in a story that no longer needed her punctuation. 10. Forgive for power, not peace. Forgiveness is rarely poetic. It doesn't arrive wrapped in a sunset or spoken with trembling lips and teary eyes. Sometimes it comes quietly, without ceremony, without witness. Just a whisper in the soul that says, "I'm done carrying what never belonged to me." Daniel stood alone on a weathered cliffside in Oregon, the Pacific stretching out in front of him like an endless question. The wind was sharp, the kind that clears your thoughts whether you want it to or not. And for once he didn't think of her with ache. He thought of her with distance, not anger, not yearning, just space. She hadn't apologized, hadn't reached out, and maybe she never would. But Daniel wasn't waiting on her anymore. He didn't need closure wrapped in apologies that would only open old wounds. He needed freedom. And freedom, he learned, wasn't granted. It was chosen. So he forgave her, not with words, not with some grand declaration or hidden hope that she'd hear about it and feel remorse. He forgave her because he refused to carry her weight into his next chapter. Because dragging her memory like a chain behind him wasn't strength. It was delay. It was letting her echo write parts of a story she no longer lived in. He didn't post about it, didn't journal some poetic monologue about moving on. He just watched the tide roll in and imagined her name dissolving into the surf. Forgiveness for Daniel was the final act of power. Not weakness, not surrender, but sovereignty. She expected to be hated, expected to be remembered with fire. But what she got was worse, oblivion. Because when you truly forgive, not for peace but for power, you don't just close the door. You build a life where they never existed at all. Final frame. Rise without looking back. By the time she realized what she'd let go, Daniel had already outgrown the version of himself who once waited at the door. He no longer checked the rearview mirror. He was too far down a road paved with stillness, integrity, and quiet purpose. His life now wasn't loud, but it was full, built on early mornings that belonged only to him, on deep conversations with people who saw his worth before he had to prove it, on laughter that didn't ache, and love that didn't require shrinking. He wasn't driven by revenge. He wasn't living to be remembered. He was living to be whole. And that's the kind of man regret can't touch, the man who no longer needs the past to validate his future. While she lingered in what could have been, he stood firmly in what is. Unbothered, unreachable, unshaken, because Daniel had done the bravest thing a man can do. He stopped waiting to be chosen, and finally, irrevocably, chose himself. And in that final frame, he didn't burn bridges. He simply walked across them, never once needing to look back.